Oh, it is good to be back here in this lovely valley I have been blessed to call home for 12 years. Here in this place, I have so much to be thankful for. There is the stunning natural beauty of this place, deeply nourished by rivers and aquifers. Here I also enjoy deep love and support of my beloved congregation, the body that meets here in this particular space. Here I have more friends than I can number and more blessings than I can count. In this place, I understand the poetry of the 23rd Psalm, which is the one that describes God as a shepherd, leading us beside still waters, setting before us a table of abundance, the cup overflowing. That particular psalm also speaks, though, of the darker places in life, the valley of the shadow of death. And I can also imagine that place after my recent trip to the desert. I spent 2 weeks in the Southwest between Albuquerque and southwestern Colorado, which meant that I had to drive 275 miles through stunningly beautiful but strikingly barren land. Now, I know that there is life in the desert, but it's not found in lush pastures. The truth is, I have trouble seeing life in the desert because I've never spent much time in one. I am happiest when I am surrounded by lots of green and trees and water, places I can spot abundance, knowing that if the car breaks down, I will not perish from hunger or thirst. Honestly, the desert fills me with the urge to hoard. Do we have enough snacks and water and oxygen? Oxygen? Yes, because I was driving with precious cargo, my mother, who was in need of constant supplemental oxygen. She had spent 2 weeks in Albuquerque undergoing double bypass surgery and other treatments to heal her heart. And when she was finally cleared to go home, I was the one to drive her. Now, I had never even been to New Mexico, so every unfamiliar mile of that desert drive was brand new to me, as was the role of caregiver. My mom had literally been broken, split wide open, and my job was to help keep her together and fed and hydrated and oxygenated while she healed. But first, that drive through the desert. And even before that, there was the shock of just taking it all in. My days in Albuquerque were spent between the hospital room, the waiting room, my Airbnb, and the neighborhood around it where I wandered in search of sustenance. My needs were the usual ones: food, hydration, community, spiritual support. Well, thankfully, I do know that God is my shepherd and I shall never want for God's presence. And it turns out that Albuquerque is a delightful place for anyone wanting good food and drink, but I didn't know a soul in that town, so where was I supposed to find community? Well, as it turns out, there is abundance even in the desert. My Airbnb host who rented me a room in his home had a heart of gold, and when I explained the reason for my visit, he had deep compassion for me. Turns out that his mom also had undergone bypass surgery, and he understood before I did what I should expect. He held space for my fear, my uncertainty, and my ever-changing date of departure. He and his spouse and their dog Axel became my family in Albuquerque. They had my back. My days began with sunrise coffee on their front porch and ended with evening strolls through their neighborhood, discovering even more abundance that gave me life in that desert place. Our neighborhood featured very friendly local restaurants, artistically whimsical gardens, yard signs celebrating the belovedness of all people, and those little libraries that look like mailboxes where you can take or leave a book. I took one and I savored it like a visit with a friend over my dinner one night, feeling like that desert place might not be so barren after all, if you only looked for the blessing. Even the most sterile and unwelcoming place of all, that would be the hospital, became a place of community. As I got to know my mom's nurses and other caregiving team, my favorite was James, who generously shared his own story of growing up in Brazil, immigrating to the US, and following in his late mother's footsteps to become a nurse. The depth of compassion James and all the others showed us was remarkable, reminding me why we don't call nursing a profession, but a vocation. My time in the desert turned out to be healing for me, even as I struggled with the enormity of what was happening with my mom and our family. And so I can relate just a little bit better to our gospel lesson today. You knew I'd get to it eventually. It's from Matthew chapter 14, and it takes place just after Jesus had heard some devastating news about his beloved cousin John, who you see had been murdered by King Herod Antipas. And I can only imagine Jesus' grief as he took in that horrible news, which must have been even worse than that phone call I got regarding my mom's emergency heart surgery. So how did Jesus heal? This is how Matthew tells it. I'm jumping in at line 13. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now, the elements of this story that stood out to me in this particular season of my life were, first, Jesus entered a deserted place. Deserted, but not a desert. It was near the Sea of Galilee, and as we heard, it was grassy, rich with life. However, it was lonely. Jesus seemed to seek out some solitude in his grief, as one does. But soon, the crowds of people appeared, as they will, not necessarily out of sympathy, mind you, but out of need. They brought their sick for him to heal, and Jesus, the wounded healer, he felt deep compassion for them. I think of our nurses and doctors working their long shifts, dealing with their own family issues and life challenges, and yet they unfailingly show up to share their gifts of healing. Having met these people in real life, I can picture Jesus all the more clearly. He is every doctor, every nurse, every therapist, everyone who offers compassionate healing to the crowds flocking to them in their places of work, whether state-of-the-art hospitals or dusty refugee camps. Even in the most remote places, the gift of healing is needed, and where it is offered, there is Jesus. Now, having completed his work, Jesus could have dismissed the crowds. Remember, it was late and people were hungry. His close friends, having his back, encouraged him to call it a day. They too felt the rumblings of hunger, time to clock out, but there were more gifts to unpack, and this time it would require some audience participation. Was there any food? Precious little. Nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish. What a joke for a hungry crowd of 5,000 men, plus the accompanying women and children no one dared to count. Put a little more water in the soup, my dad used to say, but seriously, this isn't going to work in a situation like this. Only somehow it did. Jesus blessed that little meal, and he broke the bread, and somehow there was enough. In fact, there was more than enough. There in green pastures they were fed, and their cups overflowed. Their bellies were full, and there were 12 baskets left over. Any Jew would have noted the symbolism. 12, the number that defined their people, the 12 original tribes of Israel, of which only 1.5 remained, but still the number was powerful. Enough food for all, plus enough leftovers to symbolize abundance for those not present. All because of Jesus' blessing and breaking and sharing. Sharing. This is the miracle. One person's meal shared with 5,000 households of strangers. Jesus, even in his brokenness and grief, blessed and broke the bread and distributed it to this crowd of strangers, and out of blessing came abundance. Where did it come from, you might ask? How did 2 fish and 5 loaves feed so many? Was it magic, perhaps? A miracle? I have long suspected that the miracle was that folks began to look around and recognize what was happening. One person's meal was being offered up to any who hungered, and they, like Jesus, were moved with compassion. Anyone with so much as a crust of bread would certainly have taken it out and broken it into portions enough to feed those nearby who had no bread of their own, and those with some dried fish would have done likewise. Maybe there were even some dates and figs or skins of wine. You know how it goes. You have been to a potluck. The first dish looks so small and lonely on that big old table, but then others begin to appear, and pretty soon you're begging people to take some food home. We're all gloriously full because of the generosity of those who had the means to cook that day. What a blessed abundance. And there sits Jesus in the middle, his weary eyes shining with joy, as God's beloved people begin to live as God intended, not sneaking off to gobble up their solitary meals, but making sure everyone gets something in their tummy. It would be a miracle indeed if the world worked that way. No one hungry, no one walking miles and miles to carry water that may or may not even be safe to drink, no one unsheltered, no one going without health care, no one denied education for lack of money. Wouldn't that be something miraculous? I would call that the kingdom of God if I saw that kind of world. I am tempted at times to cry out, Jesus, when will that kingdom be here? But he would answer, now as he did back then, the kingdom of God is within you. It is within us, meaning we hold the potential for it to burst forth in all its glory, if only we would remember that even in deserted places there is abundance. There is enough of everything we could possibly need for all to have their fill and then some, if only it is shared by those moved by compassion. So what keeps this from being the rule and not the exception? I suppose it must be fear. Fear of scarcity. Well, what if there isn't enough? And we are told in many ways, both subtle and overt, that there is not enough time or money or space or imagination. We even get the message that we ourselves are not enough and must spend much resource to improve this dire situation. How could we possibly spare any extra when we don't even have enough to achieve the perfection dangled before us by the merchants peddling their wares? Oh, my friends, scarcity is a myth, a lie designed to keep us chasing the brass ring. The truth is we already have what we need. I mean, collectively we have what we need. The problem is one of distribution. The truth, God's truth, is called abundance. Our loving God, who has given us all we might need to live well on this generous earth, our God would delight greatly to see us become like Christ, who even in his brokenness offered blessing. May we do likewise, both giving and receiving according to the need of the moment, and giving thanks for the blessed abundance of it all. There is infinite grace even in the most desolate space, as I learned during my time in the desert. I was blessed. May blessing be yours. May abundance be your reality.